Ladies and gentlemen, welcome wrestling fans worldwide to Knoxville and the Great Smoky Mountains for the Ron Fuller, Tennessee Studcast.
6 feet 9 inches tall, 265 pounds.
This historic podcast from one of the most respected and successful wrestlers and promoters will follow the footsteps of the largest and oldest wrestling family on the planet.
Listen to what I'm saying. That's right. Bring that camera in here a little bit closer.
Through 93 years and 4 generations.
The stud has arrived.
Old school or new fan, this unique broadcast will educate and captivate as Ron details decades of professional wrestling's growth with truly unforgettable stories.
I want those people out there at home to hear the stud.
Sit back and enjoy the ride with the Tennessee Stud.
The Tennessee Stud. You will learn that name. You will remember it.
And now,
the stud is here.
Hey everybody, welcome in. It's David Summers hosting another Studcast with the Tennessee Stud, Ron Fuller. This is the story of wrestling in America as told by the Stud, whose family started the profession 100 years ago. Let's step back into the ring, back into time. Let's get wall-to-wall, treetop tall with the Tennessee Stud, Ron Fuller. Hey, Ron, listen, this has been a crazy week, but you actually had kind of an up-close and personal moment with the legend Jimmy Buffett.
Yeah, man, I did, as a matter of fact. And I was down there in that part of the country where he was from, in Mobile, that area down there. And 1975, I went to Tennessee, and I heard about, and I just heard of his name before. This was before he had practically any records out even. Mm-hmm. But I heard of him, and I wanted to go see him. And he was at the University of Tennessee, but he wasn't in a coliseum. He wasn't in a big building. He was in a classroom, man. There couldn't have been more than 60 people in there.
Wow.
And it was just him by himself, had no band, with his guitar.
Wow.
So pretty intimate little affair, man, with a guy that was going on to be a billionaire. And wow, what a loss. Man.
Oh, no doubt. Everybody seemed to be in it, and the news came on the big opening day for college football, and they were singing his songs in the stadiums all across the nation. That's really incredible. Hey, listen, Stud, your immense struggle in 1979 to keep your dream of running 2 successful territories at the same time alive has made your Studcast one of the most popular wrestling podcasts on this planet. You were doing something in professional wrestling that had never been done before. Every Studcast now seems to have another mountain to climb. So, in which territory was the mountain highest this week?
That's a good question, Dave. I mean, wow, it's been a pretty troubling deal for a while here with our Studcast. It seems like the Southeastern Gulf Coast territory had, I guess I'd call it the dishonor at this point, for most of the year in 1979. It had been a very good start there in 1979 after a great first year in 1978 when we got that business off the ground. And my brother Robert was the booker there to start 1979. And most of an excellent crew that we had moved from Knoxville down south into the Gulf Coast there ended up leaving and going to Memphis territory. And they went there, obviously, to help my father and to help his partner, Jerry Jarrett, kind of rebuild and survive one of the worst periods for that territory since that I had been there in 1975 as their heavyweight champion, the Southern heavyweight champion. So by March of 1979, the Southeastern Gulf Coast territory was basically left with a crew, man, that was almost as weak as the last Gulf Coast crew that kind of killed that territory down there in 1977. And we purchased it in late 1977, just before the first of 1978, from the Fields brothers. And we changed not only the territory name, but at the same time, the attitude, man, and the direction. And here we were now, almost a year after opening Southeastern, back where we began, with basically a dead territory again in 1979.
All right, so that's a pretty good description, Stud, of what happened between March of 1978 and March of 1979 in southeastern Gulf Coast. So what did you do to revive southeastern Gulf Coast?
Well, in March 1979, I hired a booker, Louis Tillett, which everybody knows about at this point. He went out there. He found the Hulk. He found the Samoans that were in Pensacola. He brought in Ox Baker. He brought in Austin Idol. That's just to name a few of the talent that he brought in. And he got things going. And then suddenly by midsummer, out of nowhere, he lost the Hulk. Now we've lost the Samoans in the last Studcast. Soon we're going to lose Crusher Blackwell, and not very long before we lose Austin Idol. So obviously in the last Studcast, I fired him, and I had to at this point. And so that's kind of where we stand today in southeastern Gulf Coast, which is the second week in September we're going to be talking about in this Studcast. And so the mountain there is a pretty high to climb, say that.
Yeah, we're not used to mountains here in the southeastern Gulf Coast area. Of course, you are in Tennessee. You've already climbed those mountains a number of times. All right, so what about the situation in southeastern Knoxville territory? The second week in September 1979.
Well, the year of 1979 in the Tennessee territory started out as the fourth straight year of continual growth. We had been growing since 1976. The Knoxville War came kind of from out of nowhere, man, in June. And for the first time in 4 years, it basically stopped the growth of the Tennessee territory. By the second week in September of 1979, about 20% of our crowds had been lost basically to the Knoxville Fives All-Star Wrestling Company. But even more concern to me was the loss, the small loss basically of the fans. 20% is not a huge amount, but it's not what you want to see. But more concern to me than that small loss was how they were handling their company and the wrestling war itself. Their last card, we talked about it in the last Studcast, was a great example of what I'm talking about. And I was concerned, man, with how they were doing business, what they were saying on their TV shows, these crazy challenges they were sending that they knew weren't going to be answered. And that plus the fact we were going to have to send more Tennessee talent down south the Gulf Coast, it was really a concern for me, man.
Not a very pretty picture that you've painted, Ron. So the title for this Studcast, this is number 315, incredibly, number 315. So the title is Record Small Crowd, Blackwell Gone. So I assume since Blackwell was working in the Gulf Coast, the record small crowd must have been in Tennessee. So which of these two problems are we going to tackle first this week?
Yeah, well, we're going to start in Tennessee, man. But it was going back on the road again. I was having to, at this point, back on the planes, back in the car, kind of working both territories, and especially during this week, what we're going to be talking about in this episode. And there was more bad news in Tennessee at this point. We were out of the Coliseum on our normal Friday night, and we were also out of my second choice, which was the Chilhowie Park Amphitheater, because the fair was just finishing and they had to remove a lot of stuff, and that amphitheater wasn't available either. So we were forced to go into the very much disliked Bill Meyer Baseball Stadium. And that meant automatically that we could expect the smallest Knoxville crowd of the year in the Tennessee territory for sure. And if it rained, it could be even worse than that. So we'll discuss the TV promoting the Bill Meyer Stadium show, the results of the card, and the attendance. And then we'll jump back down south in the Gulf Coast, and we'll focus on Mobile, Alabama card in the Expo Hall down there, the TV promoting it, the results of the matches, the attendances in all three of the major cities there. And I'll even discuss a very rare meeting that I was going to have with the entire crew down there. So then, I think, Dave, we got a really good chance of getting a learning tree question in, man, put it into this Studcast.
Hey, I'm glad to hear that, Ron, about the learning tree possibility. So that's cool. I have the perfect question. It pertains to the subject that you discussed last Studcast about how wrestlers got booked and what you didn't get to last week. Why Vince McMahon Jr. totally changed the business model of professional wrestling. So let's get started. Who was on the Bill Meyer Baseball Stadium card that you mentioned Friday, September 14th, 1979?
Well, Dino was wrestling against Gilbert, a really, really talented guy who was at this point called Redbeard because he basically had grown his beard out and it was red. So, and then what would be a great match on that card, Paul Orndorff was wrestling Tony Charles. Wow, what a great event that was. Then there was the midget match with Lone Eagle versus Tony Charles. And Lone Eagle versus Butch Cassidy, who is, we'll talk mention a little bit more about Butch Cassidy here later on. And in a special challenge match, Bob Armstrong was going to be facing Alexis Smirnoff, managed by Gorgeous George Jr. And then there was a another $5,000 bounty match. Last program, the last guest, Stomper had dealt with Alexis Smirnoff. This time he was going to deal with Tora Tanaka, who was managed by Gorgeous George Jr. And then in the main event, Robert and I were defending the Southeastern Tag Belts against Jimmy Golden and Norvell Austin.
Okay, so it sounds like a really good card for a bad venue like a baseball stadium. So how about the TV to set this whole thing up and promote this card?
Well, it opened with Jimmy Golden and Norvell Austin at the set with Les. And Golden was irate, man, about what had happened to him the night before. And Norvell was angry, obviously, as well. But Austin made a point to Les that, he had been barred from ringside in the match the night before. Jimmy Golden was against Dick Slater for the Southeastern Championship. And, he said, Jimmy was finally getting his chance to win the Southeastern Championship against Dick Slater, and they said I couldn't be at ringside for it. So, the still shot behind them because they were sitting at the desk with Les, had Jimmy Golden on top of Dick Slater for the pin, right? And, so when the video began on the big screen behind them again, Norvell pointed out that he wasn't, look, I'm not at ringside. And then Les pointed out, he says, you're not at ringside, but why is Gorgeous George Jr. there? Right? So he was already mad. So he yelled right off. He goes, oh, what difference does that make, Thatcher? He goes, look where Slater is, man. Look at the video. Flat on his back. And look, I'm on top of him. I'm about to win the Southeastern Championship. And about that time, the Mongolian Stomper came into the picture. And as soon as Gigi saw him, Gigi took off running to the dressing room. So Stomper chased him to the dressing room. And because this was a no DQ match, Robert was standing back there with me watching the match. He just went straight up to the ring. He went right in the ring. Jimmy was on top of Slater. He stomped him in the back. He pile drived him. He put Slater on top of Jimmy, and he came back to the curtain in the back of the building. And so Jimmy, watching all this, right, and he screamed at Les, did you see what Robert Fuller did to me? Because, and the referee, he just stood there. So Les says, which he had a good point, he goes, well, why not? He says, it was a no disqualification match, Jimmy. What did you expect the referee to do?
Right.
So Jimmy got really mad now. Les had gotten on the wrong side of him for sure. So Jimmy got so nasty. Norvell had to kind of grab him, man. He was going to go for Les, right? And then Jimmy screamed, it was a no disqualification match. He goes, and that rule applied to me and Slater. It wasn't for Robert Fuller. He goes, he's not in that match. So he said, what was he doing there, Les Thatcher? And so he says, I'll tell you why he was there, Les, because he's still mad about me making him bald-headed. So he says, my hand should have been raised right then, Les Thatcher. I should be wearing the Southeastern belt right now. It should be right here at the desk with me. So then Norvell's trying to calm him down at this point. And he says to him, like, Jimmy, hey, that's why we're getting this Southeastern Tag Championship match this upcoming week. We don't worry about that Southeastern belt. We're going to both be wearing belts next Friday night. We're going to get the Southeastern tag belts. And then he says, Jimmy's still about to go for Les. He says, come on, we're in the first match. Let's go to the ring. Let's kick some butt. So Golden was screaming at Les, and Norvell kind of pulled him away from the set and off to the ring. And there was a couple of guys already standing in the ring waiting on him. And, Golden didn't. Once he saw the two guys, he didn't even wait for the announcement. He just took off. He slid into the ring. He started whipping both of them's butt, right? And naturally, Phil Rainey, who was scared of everything that happened in the ring, he took off running. He never made any announcement, and Golden never even tagged Norvell. He did the whole deal in about 5 minutes. He whipped both of them's butt and ended up pinning both of them. And when he's headed for the dressing room, he was still screaming at Les on his way past the set. So, he was on fire.
Obviously, that TV was off to a good start. So who was on next?
Well, it was me and Rob. And we were in the TV Tag Championship match on television, which we didn't do that very often, especially when it wasn't in the rating period time. But we threw this one in, and we tried to get a win as soon as possible, after we took our belts off. We were trying basically to match the intensity of Jimmy Golden in the first match. Jimmy was a ball of fire, and I said, Rob, we got to do something here, man, to make Jimmy look bad. So, and then we were pretty close to making that happen, man. Both of us won again with the Fuller leg locks. We both had the Fuller leg locks on our opponents, and so we didn't do bad, but I don't know that we matched Jimmy's intensity.
Wow. Okay, but what about the personality profile? Who'd you have on that?
Well, Gorgeous George Jr. was on this week with his men, and last week the Stomper had been on there. So before Les got into anything with Gigi about the Stomper, he showed Gigi and Alexis Smirnoff an interview from Bob Armstrong about Bob had an upcoming match the next Friday night with the Russian, with Smirnoff. And once that was over, then Gigi just took over the profile, man, the entire profile. And he used it as a rebuttal, man, basically to everything the Stomper had said about him in the last profile the week before. So he began by calling the Stomper right off a liar. He says he's a bald-faced liar. He said that I kept him from talking. He said, I never, ever told the Mongol not to talk. But he said somebody should have, because he made an idiot out of himself last week when he did talk.
Oh, God.
So he was really getting into him right away. And I said, and he said, now this Friday, he goes, I got my Japanese tank here, Tora Tanaka, and he's going to run over the Stomper. He's going to smash him to pieces, and then the Stomper going to have to be carried from the ring. They're going to take him to the hospital, just like he was a couple of weeks ago when we got on him. And he said, hopefully, they'll take him from there to the funeral home. So he was really being nasty. And then Tanaka, he very rarely said anything, especially since, he had the man, Gigi, there as his manager. So Tanaka kind of got excited with his opportunity that he's got a chance to go against the Stomper for the bounty. And he said, I'm going to end this for you, boss. I know you have bad time here. And he goes, I end career for the Mongol. I now win the $5,000 bounty, big reward, big night.
Wow.
So, Gorgeous George Jr. as always, he just cut him off, man. He was so disrespectful to guys. And, he said, I'm not going to stop. He goes, telling Les, he goes, I'm not going to stop bringing in bounty hunters until that happens, until somebody does put him in the hospital and then maybe in the funeral home. And he says, then he hinted to Les, he says, if necessary, he goes, I have a well-known, extremely dangerous man. He's just been waiting for his chance to win the $5,000. He said, this wrestler is famous for getting this type of job done. He's a real man, which was kind of insulting to Tanaka and Smirnoff, right? But he says, he's a real man. And he says, he's put 2 wrestlers in their graves already. And the studio audience let him know what they thought about that comment. They were like, oh, they booed like crazy, and they didn't even know who he was talking about, I don't think.
Was he talking about Ox Baker, Ron?
Well, hey, at this point, man, I was pulling out all the stops, Dave, and why not? We're in a war, man, and on the Studcast next week, we're going to be back in the Coliseum, and there's not going to be just one new star in that main event on the next one, but there's going to be 2 of them in that match.
Wow, so what about the next TV match?
So Alexis Smirnoff and Gorgeous George Jr. Alexis went with Gorgeous George Jr. and they took Gorgeous George Jr.'s tank to the ring, man. And Tanaka, boy, wow, did he make an impression as always. I mean, he was just everybody. All the heels were on fire here in this show, and Tanaka, boy, he just demolished the guy. And then Jay jumped in the ring. Gigi jumped in to celebrate the victory, and so did Smirnoff. And they carried the guy out of the ring. They were still in the ring when they carried the guy that Tanaka demolished out. They were still celebrating.
Wow. So how did the TV end, Stud? Was it just complete mayhem?
Well, with the studio audience, basically, this one ended up good, man, because they got their new star, man, the Southeastern Star, the Mongolian Stomper at this point. And the Stomper, he had watched all these matches, and everybody was so intense that, wow, he came in and did it maybe more big time than everybody else. He stomped the guy in the face about 4 times. And, before he could leave the ring, then Gigi and his 2 guys came back into the studio. And Stomper's in there by himself, and he's got those 2 guys standing there. Gigi's behind him, and Stomper just says, come on in, get some of it, right? And, boy, they didn't hesitate, man. They took right off. They both went in, they attacked him, and they kind of got him down a little bit. And, boy, he started to come back. And that studio went crazy, man. And he put both those guys on the mat, and then he just shot out on the floor, man, and headed for Gorgeous George Jr. And George, man, that did what he's been doing now at this point for about 3 weeks. He ran like a man possessed, man, not just out of the studio, but out of the building.
Wow.
All right. He went into the parking lot. He was gone.
All right, so that was a really good TV show, Stud. What happened the next Friday night in the Bill Meyer Baseball Stadium?
Well, par for the course, man. As things have been going in 1979, we got rain. And not nearly as hard as it rained in 1976 out there when I beat Dory Funk Jr. in a Texas death match to earn my shot at the NWA World Champion, his brother, Terry Funk, 2 weeks after that night. There wasn't that kind of driving rain, but it was enough of a rain for ringside people to not be able to sit out there where they had their seats, and they had to go underneath the covered grandstand. It was just a bad deal. And in that night, Dean Ho, he beat Redbeard in the opening match. Paul Orndorff got the biggest win that he had gotten since he came to Southeastern. He got a win over Tony Charles, and that was pretty darn difficult, especially since they were both baby faces. In the midget match, Lone Eagle got a win over the local guy who was born in Knoxville, and he was kind of a star there. His name was Butch Cassidy. And years later, man, he's going to become a backup for Dr. D. David Schultz years after this match. This is after Schultz had slapped John Stossel and got out of wrestling. and became a bounty hunter. He's going to take this little midget with him to be his backup guy as a bounty hunter.
Are you kidding, Ron? Did that actually happen? I mean, you got to tell us that story in a Studcast one day for sure.
Yeah, it actually did, man. You got to read David Schultz's book, man.
Wow.
Schultz has got a book out, and he took a little Butch Cassidy, man. And I guess that's probably a pretty decent idea if you're a bounty hunter, but nobody's expecting a midget to be backing you up.
Right.
So maybe we'll get to that someday, Dave. But the next match was scheduled to be Bob Armstrong versus Alexei Smirnoff, managed by Gorgeous George Jr. And Gigi brought, obviously, his Russian to the ring, but there was no Bob Armstrong. And he wasn't there because he was also booked in Dothan, Alabama on this same night. And we'll be talking about that in the second part of this Studcast. I'll kind of explain that. So the announcer, Phil Rainey, who was Les Thatcher's co-host on the TV, he announced that Bob Armstrong wasn't going to be able to appear on tonight's card. And Gigi just jumped up and down, man. He was ecstatic. He heard that news, and he grabbed his man's hand and he raised it in victory, or so he thought anyway. And the crowd started booing, like there wasn't going to be a match. And then Phil said, whoa, wait a minute, Gorgeous George. He goes, luckily there is someone here to take Bob's place. And he goes, and he's the current Southeastern champion, Dick Slater. Well, gosh, the crowd popped, and Dick wasn't even on that card. So, but he knew that Bob wasn't going to be there, so he was prepared and ready to go. So Dick came out to the dressing room, out onto the field, and into the little bit of rain that was going on, and they had a great match, man. And Dick got his hand raised at the end of the match, and Smirnoff got disqualified in the match. And then next was the $5,000 bounty match, Tora Tanaka, who was managed by Gorgeous George Jr., against a Mongolian Stomper. And those two guys had what they'd been having, man. As you would imagine, it was an extremely bloody match. And both guys were bleeding, and Stomper was getting his hand raised. With Tanaka unable to get up at the end of the match, he had gotten the best of Tanaka. And Smirnoff and Gigi came down to the ring before the Stomper could get out of the ring. And the Stomper was still bleeding. Stomper was, it had been a tough match with him and Tanaka. And Gigi grabbed a chair, handed it to Smirnoff, and when Stomper started to climb through the ropes to leave, Smirnoff hit him in the head with the chair. Then Gigi and Smirnoff started kicking the heck out of Stomper, and finally Dick Slater had to come down, chased him away, and so both the Stomper and Tanaka had to be held back to the dressing room. Tough match for both.
Wow.
Main event was for the Southeastern Tag Belts, and this night, Jimmy Golden and Norvell Austin won the Southeastern Tag Belts from Rob and I. We've been champions for about 8 weeks. This was our third run as Southeastern Tag Champions, and for 8 weeks we've been undefeated, but Golden and Austin finally got the belts.
Wow. Okay, how about attendance on this rainy night? And was rain predicted in advance? Or did you guys know, oh, no, this is not going to be what we hope? What was that like?
Well, he didn't know till about the day before.
Yeah.
The weather wasn't quite as good as it is nowadays at projecting and forecasting what's going to happen. Mm-hmm. So we knew by Thursday that we were probably going to get the rain. So it was by far the lowest Knoxville attendance of the entire year in 1979. It was just over 2,100 fans. And when you took into consideration the venue, the rain, the war, the fans' disgust with the wrestling war situation, and all that had combined, man, to take the wind out of my sails, man. I went home that night as beaten as if 5 guys had worked me over, man. And this kind of crowd night combined with what was happening 500 miles to the south, basically, Dave, it was kind of taking away my love of the sport, man. I was really struggling at this point with the war and with what was happening in my territories.
Wow. Did it feel like burnout, Ron? I mean, just with everything going on, I've had enough for now. I need a break.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I needed a break, but it was just I could not figure out how to make it happen.
Wow.
And that was what was so frustrating for me. It really, really was a tough time for me.
Yeah, I can only imagine, Ron. 1979, man, what a year. All right, so probably seemed like the weight of the world was on your shoulders at that young age. So when we come back, we're going to take our break right here. After the break, we're going to find out what happened in Mobile, Alabama, 2 nights before this Tennessee disaster in 1979. We'll take a break, and this Studcast will continue in a moment. All right, Studcast fans, don't miss the Ask the Stud number 9 question and answer show on Saturday, September 16th on YouTube Southeastern Rewind. They're one of the best historical wrestling shows anywhere. The Stud is a walking encyclopedia loaded with information few people on the planet can match. Now is the time for your question to be asked. Look for his Ask the Stud post on 3 Facebook sites: Ron Fuller Welch, Ron Fuller Welch Author, and Ron Fuller, the Tennessee Stud, where you can automatically become friends by simply liking and following him there if you're not already his friend. He's also on Twitter at Ron Fuller Welch. Leave your question on any of those and be ready for an incredible answer. Saturday, September 16th, YouTube Southeastern Rewind. All right, Studcast fans, welcome back. The Studcast continues. For you, Ron, it's been a tough first part of this Studcast. So now we're back on the road again, back down south, Mobile, Alabama, 2 nights before the Knoxville card that we discussed in the first part of this Studcast. You mentioned earlier that you were going to have a meeting that night with the Southeastern Gulf Coast crew. Let's start there. I'm kind of curious to hear what you were going to have to say to the guys.
Okay, so let's start the evening off, man, where it actually started, which was in the dressing room, long before fans filled the building. So we were in the Mobile's Expo Hall. It was on Wednesday night, September 12th, 1979. There was about 20 people in this meeting. I think there was, I would predict, I think there were 14 wrestlers on the card. Louis Tillett, who was the former booker that I was replacing, and he was helping me work out his notice, and he was handling some finishes for me in the TV shows when I had to be in Knoxville and when I couldn't be there. Plus Roy Lee Welch, who besides wrestling on a lot of cards, was pretty much handling everything else for me at this point. And there were 2 Mobile referees, I think, in that meeting, plus Charlie Platt, TV commentator, and Larry Brock, who was the referee in Dothan, Alabama, had ridden over from Dothan to Mobile with Charlie Platt. So I wasn't a big fan of these meetings, man, and I rarely held them, but this was obviously a territory in disarray, I guess is a good way to put it. I mean, someone basically needed to set the course for the future, man. And so I thanked everybody that was in the room and for their work and in the ring and on the TV. And then I told Louis, I kind of put Louis over a little bit because, and this was honest, he had done a tremendous job under difficult circumstance. He produced an all-time record crowd in Dothan that was never broke, and probably would have never gotten broken after that. And that said, Louis is going to be here helping me. I'm going to handle the booking, but he's going to be helping me. And he's going to be here as long as I need him. And then I talked about some of the guys in the room. Talked about Mike Stallings and Eddie Mansfield and both the Assassins. And, I told everybody, and I wanted to give everybody a little history of since we had come down there to that territory. I said that Stallings and Mansfield and both Assassins had been there in the first year, when we came in 1978 and started this out. And I said, they helped to explode the wrestling business from what was a horrible territory when we opened it up to being, they basically helped us put it on the map, put the territory on the map. Then I thanked Ox Baker. I thanked Austin Idol, Dick Steinborn, Jerry Stubbs, the Wrestling Pro, Herb Calvert, all guys that were veterans, man, and leaders in the dressing room. And they knew how important their input was to the future, and I kind of wanted to acknowledge every one of them individually, said something nice about them, if I had the opportunity and the time. And I also thank Crusher Blackwell, who was that night finishing up in the territory for all that he had done in both the territories. And wished him well because I knew he was going into the American Wrestling Association. He was going into Minnesota, into the AWA, and I told him, you're going to be under the tutelage of my really good friend, Vern Gagne, man. And I said, be careful with Vern. He may hurt you. So, and everybody got a laugh out of that. So I asked if anyone had anything to say, and thankfully nobody did. So that was good. I didn't, I wasn't wanting to have this last all night, and I kind of ended with a promise, man, to do as much as possible. I wanted everybody, and I was going to be there as much as possible from this point on. And I was going to do my best to make all of them happy as possible, as I possibly could. And I said, this commitment not only came from me, but it's coming from another owner too. And I said, you're going to be seeing him. You've already saw him 2 nights earlier in Montgomery, and that's Bob Armstrong. And you're going to see him again Friday night in Dothan. And I ended up then by saying, guys, let's go out there and tear this house down tonight.
Wow. So that sounds like something probably very much needed, Stud. So how about the card for that night?
Well, basically, it was even more than just needed, Dave. It was kind of like crucial. I had to let them know that what was happening down there was just as important to me as what was happening in Tennessee. So I didn't want to belittle that territory, man. I want to let those guys know how important it was that we keep things going and get it cranked up again. So then Herb Calvert opened tonight against the Hunter, Rock Hunter. And, so the newcomer Tom McBride was going to be meeting Eddie Mansfield that night. Wrestling pro Leon Baxter was going to be taking on the Gladiator, Dick Steinborn. Stubbs and Stallings, this was their second week in the territory, were going to be, for the first time ever, wrestling the Assassins, who were the tag champions. But they weren't going to be wrestling for the title, but they were going to be meeting the best team in the territory. The next match was the Southeastern Championship match. Austin Idol was going to be defending against me. And the main event was the loser leaves Southeastern match. No time limit, no disqualification. Ox Baker versus Crusher Blackwell.
That's a great card. All right, so who was on the TV?
Well, it was loaded, man, with videos and great matches. Crusher Blackwell opened the show with Charlie Platt at the set. They watched the video from Mobile that was done 3 nights earlier, in which basically that's the night I was there. And Blackwell and Ox had their normal bloody confrontation that ended up with no winner, fighting back to the dressing room. And Blackwell was at the set with Les, and he just made it clear. He says, I'm through with these kind of matches, Les. He goes, not Les, but Charlie. He said, I'm through with these kind of matches, Charlie. And, he said, what I want now is a loser leaves Southeastern match. I want it in this very next week. I don't want to put it off any further. I want it to be no disqualification. I want it to be no time limit. And I want that it has to have a winner. And the loser is going to disappear from Southeastern Wrestling. So Charlie Platt told me, studio audience, they agreed, man, with what he wanted, So they made that even clearer, man, when he went to the ring for the first match. He went straight to the ring after he watched this and had a little bit of comments about it. And he won the match, obviously. And wow, he did another one of those devastating 425-pound dives off the top rope on an opponent that just squashed him again. Wow, just amazing. Charlie says, wow, Ron, he's going to kill somebody doing that someday. So then the Southeastern Tag Champions, the Assassins, they joined Charlie at the set. And and they watched the loser leave Southeastern tag match from Montgomery, Alabama, 5 days earlier, and that's when the Samoans were in the loser leave town, and that's one of the matches that the Samoans lost. They had to leave the Southeastern area. So after securing the win in the video, the assassin said goodbye to the Samoans. They're done, and they went into the TV. They were in a tag match for the championship on television, just as Rob and I were. So they successfully defended their belts against Herb Calvert and the newcomer Tom McBride. And then these two assassins, wow, at this point, these guys were at the top of their game. They were better than I had ever seen them.
Wow. All right, so how about the personality profile? Who'd you have there?
Well, there was two profiles in this one, Dave. One of them was with Bob Armstrong, and the other was with me. And we were both getting shots at Idol's belt the next week. Bob Armstrong was going to be wrestling him in Montgomery on a Monday night, and then on the Friday night in that same week, he was going to be wrestling him for the title in Dothan. And I was going to be getting my shot at him on Wednesday night in Mobile. And so I wasn't aware of any of that, and in my opinion, it was always much better when the wrestler on these profiles was surprised by something that they weren't aware of. I always liked to do that. I didn't want guys to just say, oh, this is all I'm going to do and this is all that's going to happen. I like to make them work for it, right? So the Southeastern Heavyweight Champion, Austin Idol, he joined Charlie on the profile. And it was done live in the studio right next to the bleachers and all the fans. And this was going to be the first of two personality profiles. So Idol only knew about the video that he was going to be watching, and that was a video a match between him and the Gladiator that was ending his 3 straight weeks of title defenses against the Masked Gladiator. And as usual, one thing about Idol, he didn't have any trouble being cocky, man, and being a heel. And so in his usual cocky self, he bragged about finally eliminating the Gladiator for good. As a contender for my belt, there's no more of that. And then he was about to get up and leave the set. He didn't know anything else was happening. And then Charlie sprung the surprise on him. Charlie asked him, said, whoa, wait, Austin, please come back and sit down. We're not finished. And so Charlie said, you are finished with title matches against the Gladiator. That's true. But now you're going to be defending this coming week against Bob Armstrong. Idol's mouth dropped open. It was like, whoa, where did this come from? Oh, and he started kind of stuttering and stammering for a moment there. And Charlie had the director run a video that Bob had made in the Georgia territory and had sent in for the occasion. And Charlie said Idol was still blown away, man, but by not being told what the real content of the profile was all about, while they've had interviews going on with Bob, he says, Idol is trying to get it together. So, but Idol being the great, the real pro, man, he got his composure back. And, Charlie said he made a tremendous interview on the end of it, and he said, why is it that Southeastern wants to hide this stuff from me, these title defenses, from out of nowhere? And he goes, and he says, it's almost going to cause him, say, this isn't going to cause me to lose my belt. He said, I'm ready for anybody. I don't care who it is. And he goes, Bob Armstrong might have been one of the most popular wrestlers in Southeastern history. But when he leaves Saturday, Friday night and Monday night, he goes, he's not going to be taking my belt with him. He's going to be leaving without the belt. That's for sure.
That had to have been your idea, right, Ron? I can see where you were right about surprising Idol and getting more from him.
Yeah, you kind of push your guy, and put him in the hot seat, basically. And sometimes you get much better than you would otherwise. So that first profile was shown on, obviously, the Montgomery TV station and the Dothan TV stations. But then after the show ended and everybody was out of the studio, then Idol and Charlie did a second tape. They did a second profile. And this time, It was going to be on the Mobile TV station, and it was an interview that I had done and sent up there. And so Idle, coming back, he made the comments about defending against me. Charlie said, he pretty much said what he'd done in the first one, but the first one was great.
That was a beauty of a TV show. So if you knew how to do things, you could work wonders with it. So after 5 years of doing it, you were probably one of the best out there. So what came next on that TV show?
Well, Jerry Stubbs and Mike Stallings got their second TV win in a row. They were ready to get in the ring with the champions assassins in all three of those major cities in the territory during the next week. And during their match, the assassins went to the set with Charlie Platt. And they made it very clear, they said, Charlie, Jerry Stubbs and Mike Stallings are not going to get a title match. We're going to wrestle them, but they're not going to get a championship match until they prove they can beat us. And we're the best team in the world, and that ain't never going to happen. Then the show closed with the big man, Ox Baker, man. Ox Baker had horrified Southeastern Gulf Coast fans since the day he arrived. And after getting another win on the TV with another opponent being carried from the ring, Ox did the last interview of the show. And he promised fans that this loser leaves Southeastern match with Crusher Blackwell, he intended to be the Crusher. He said, Blackwell is not going to be the Crusher. I'm going to be the Crusher. He said, fans shouldn't show up. They have weak hearts. He said, I'm going to tell you in advance, if you have a weak heart, don't come. He said, because I intend to use my heart punch. And he goes, I'm going to crush Blackwell's heart and maybe turn Blackwell's lights out forever.
All right, another great TV show, no doubt. What a way to end it. So I've got to admit, that man's kind of scared me. I would have hated to meet him in a dark alley. So what happened in the coming week?
So the Hunter won over Herb Calvert. Eddie Mansfield beat Tom McBride. The Gladiator won a very good babyface match over the wrestling pro, Leon Baxter, who was still a great wrestler, man. And I'm sure that was a phenomenal match. The Jerry Stubbs and Mike Stallings, they surprised everybody. They got a victory over the Assassins. It was the first loss for the Masked Men since they came there 6 weeks earlier and won the Southeastern Gulf Coast Championship belts. So basically, it earned those Georgia boys their title shot the next week. And in my championship match for Austin Idol's Southeastern title, I had knocked him through the ropes at one point onto the floor outside the ring, and the referee was pushing me back from Idol, keeping me from getting out of the ring and getting on the floor as well. And Idol's still out there on the floor, and I see Idol. He reaches into his tights, looks like he's grabbing something, and so I just I pushed my way, tried to push my way past the referee. And so the referee kept trying to push me back, and then I look up, and there's the Gladiator, who has got no reason to be there really at the ring, but he was obviously had 3 weeks worth of Austin Idol, and he just sneaked up behind Idol and put the sleeper hold on him out there on the floor. So the building was going crazy; they loved it, and Idol was fighting like crazy to get away, but the referee finally turned around and he saw that the Gladiator was lowering Idol down to the concrete. He had put him to sleep. And so the referee rang the bell. He disqualified me for the Gladiator's interference. And he went out on the floor to raise Idol's hand. And even sound asleep, Idol had got a victory.
Wow. So before we leave these championship matches you and Bob Armstrong were having with Idol, what happened in Montgomery and Dothan in the Armstrong title matches with Idol?
Well, something very similar, Dave, happened in those matches. And my being a new booker there and not having enough time to fill all the holes that were being left in this crew, man, with these departures one after another, week after week, in these loser league town matches, I needed more time to get to move talent down there and get talent from the north and send them south and find new people. So the Gladiator was going to get involved in Montgomery and in Dothan. both of those cities where Bob was. And it's something similar to what we did in Mobile against Idle as well. So next Studcast, I'm going to introduce a unique angle with the Gladiator that bought me some time, man, that I needed to improve the crew. Gladiator's going to end up a loser-leave town match, and he's going to lose, and then I won't give everybody the idea, but we're going to do something I've never seen done before. So we'll talk about that in the next Studcast. Then in the loser-leave Southeastern match, Ox did exactly what he said he was going to do. He used his hard punch on Blackwell. He ended the big man's Southeastern history, man, in both territories that had begun 9 months earlier, man, in January of 1979. Blackwell came in, and wow, did he make a name for himself in that 9 months or so.
Yeah, I'm telling you. So what a run Crusher Blackwell had, from Malenko, Roop, and Orton's puppet to a Canadian bumblebee to one of the most popular stars ever in Southeastern.
Wow, I mean, he was definitely one of the reasons Southeastern wrestling became such an iconic territory, man.
No doubt. All right, how about attendance in the three major cities down south?
Well, I've somehow, managed to get another increase in the houses down there. Montgomery basically went from 2,100 to 2,500. Mobile increased from 3,000 to 3,400. Dothan went from 2,500 up to 3,000. So in the last 3 weeks, and that's since I had started booking basically and took over from Louis, the three major cities' attendance had grown from 5,800 one week to 7,600 the next week to 8,900 the third week. That's a total like 3,000 more fans in just 3 weeks that had been added. And that was done in September, which is one of the worst months of the year. So this figure, along with the next couple of weeks, what we're going to do, was going to have a great effect, man, on the most difficult wrestling-related decision I ever made.
Wow, that's a pretty big statement there, Stud. So I can't wait to hear what that decision was all about. So this has been another great one, no doubt, overflowing with all kinds of information and real history. It looks like we are going to have enough time for a learning tree question today. This one comes from David Worthington, Denver, Colorado. He said, your explanation last Studcast of how wrestlers changed territories was excellent. And you also said you might explain how and why Vince McMahon Jr. changed the business model for the entire sport between 1988 and 1993. Can you do that today?
Well, Chase, I did say I would attempt to answer that question or something similar to it. So hopefully I can keep this answer relatively short. Wow, this is a big topic here, basically. So to begin with, Vince Jr. planned to kill wrestling, as had been done for basically 60 years before he came along as a young guy and decided, I don't like what wrestling is today, and I want to handle it all. I want to change it all. So his plan was totally, he had a totally different business model in mind. His plan was to kill the territories, to control the wrestlers he wanted and their incomes, and to be the only TV wrestling in the world, certainly in the country, and eventually, if he could, in the world. So to accomplish his goal, first he had basically to kill the territories. And so he did that by changing the business model that had basically been used by everyone in the sport since the beginning of the territories. And so he did that in three ways that jump out at me right away. The first thing he did was he got on a national TV network so his wrestlers could be seen across the country and around the world in everybody's territory. I mean, he had to go after everything. He had to have it all. So then he handpicked his wrestlers from different territories across the country, using guys that other promoters had developed into stars. And for the first time ever, he basically bought these guys, bought them away from the territories, and he did that by offering them these large, big contracts, something that they couldn't turn down, kind of money they couldn't turn down. Then to me, he did the worst thing he could have. He started bringing these stars that other people had developed into these territories, the various territories all over the country. And he liked to use the stars where they had been developed. And so he advertised the events on his TV, which was all over the country at this point. Obviously, he was going to be in direct competition with the territories. You know, it was kind of like, Dave, to relate it to something that, you know, to me, it would be like someone stealing your son from you and then making him wrestle against you in your own territory to purposely kill your business.
Wow.
That's a truly rotten business model.
Yeah, yeah. No doubt. I hate to interrupt, Brian, but, I mean, did that really happen with his greed to own it all?
It certainly did, Dave. That's all I can attribute it to. I don't know what else could have been behind it. I mean, you know, so, you know, why would you do that all across America, you know? So he basically shut down territory after territory, man, using the stars that other wrestling companies had developed against them in their own cities to put them out of business. And in the process of destroying the territories, he literally put thousands of professional wrestlers out of business. He ruined their lives. He sent them looking for a job, man, something other than wrestling, which was the only thing that most of them knew, you know. So it was a terrible deal for all of these guys that had spent their lives and they were in the sport they loved, doing what they loved, and they had no choice but to find something else to do. So the old business model had been totally changed by McMahon, and so was the product in the process. The wrestling had been, you know, so good, man, and so very popular for 60 years. Wrestling had been basically done the same way, and it was always done with some of the greatest talent that ever lived. You know, and so it was popular. After 60 years, all of a sudden, the business started to die away, just as the territories died away. When the territories went away, so did this business model that had been used for so long. Mm-hmm. So did all these great stars that had made wrestling so big for so long. Yep. And if there's anybody out there that questions that fact, that Vince McMahon Jr. created something that's much bigger than what was there, then boy, I got a tale to tell you. I can tell you that. It's pretty easy to prove that wrestling in the 80s, the 70s, and 80s was dramatically bigger than Vince McMahon ever made it. Mm-hmm. So, Mr. Worthington, out there in Colorado, sir, you know, I'm sad to say, gosh, what can I say? Look what we have today. Yeah,
absolutely. All right, so that might be the best learning tree answer ever, Stud. So what an amazing Studcast this has been. So where do we ride next week?
Well, everything at this point, Dave, seemed to be getting more bleak every week. I mean, it's like, wow, there was never a high spot. Something really wonderful happened. And coming off the worst Knoxville crowd in 5 years, I was encouraged by the return of an old friend, my old friend that had not been in Knoxville for more than a year, Andre the Giant. He's going to be coming into the next Studcast. He's going to be teaming up with the Mongolian Stomper on a very good Coliseum card, man, with Alexis Smirnoff. And true to his word, GG is bringing in the killer, Ox Baker, to team up with Smirnoff against Stomper and Andre the Giant. What a match that'll be. And I'll also talk about the TV for that one and the match results and the attendance, like always. And I've got another complete card of All-Star Company. And we'll talk about their attendance and what they had going on the next night after this big Coliseum card. And I was just doing the booking in the Gulf Coast now at this point. And it wasn't just the booking I was doing, but I was also spending about 3 days a week down there, working in towns like Montgomery and Mobile, and occasionally I'm going to get to Dothan. So trying to get things headed back in the right direction again. It was a good card in both cities next week. And there's going to be a loser leave in the southeastern Gulf Coast down there between Idle and the Gladiator. It'll be the first try of Jerry Stubbs and Mike Stallings to win the southeastern belt from the Assassins. It's going to be me against the Ox Baker. Bob Armstrong is going to be wrestling Tora Tanaka, who's going to make his southeastern Gulf Coast debut on a Friday night card in Dothan. So we'll talk about those TVs, those results, and those attendances. And I hope, like this week, I can answer another learning tree question again.
Sounds like another loaded show, Stud. We'll be there for it. Can't wait until next week. Hey, folks on Facebook, you know the deal. Go to Ron Fuller Welch, the Tennessee Stud, on Facebook. Like and follow him there to become friends with a living legend. On Twitter, same thing. Ron Fuller Welch. Follow him on Twitter, now known as X, by the way. Check out his fantastic website at tnstud.com. tnstud.com. It's got everything for every Studcast ever done, 43 Super Studcast, and the famous Stud Store for all kinds of souvenirs, including the thrilling lion novel called Brutus. Get your personally autographed copy there as well. The YouTube Southeastern Rewind channel is red hot. It's going strong. It now has 331 videos. The last 92 Studcast, including this one, will be on there. 52 Stud stories, 65 short rides with the Stud. So don't miss Ron's tribute, by the way, also to Terry Funk and Ask the Stud #8 question and answer show. They have both already set records. Subscribe now at YouTube, Southeastern Rewind. Go to YouTube, on the search bar, put in Southeastern Rewind. It comes up immediately. Click the subscribe button and the bell to make sure you get notifications. Get the very best in old school wrestling on Ron's YouTube site. All right, any last comments, Ron?
Well, yeah, man, I'd like to thank my social media friends out there, man, that I have so many of them now. It's pretty amazing. I'm approaching 20,000, and for all their comments on this last post that I did last week when wrestling was wrestling, and I had such tremendous comments. I want to thank everybody out there. And sometimes I don't get a chance to answer everybody. And please tell your friends and your neighbors about us out there, and take care of yourself and others, and may God bless us all.
For Ron Fuller in the Great Smoky Mountains of Tennessee, I'm David Summers saying thank you for listening. Find me at davidsummersproductions@gmail.com. This Studcast is a David Summers production for Tennessee Stud, LLC.
Thanks for joining us today for this historic Studcast. The true story continues next week. So full Nelson your friends and point them in our direction for another ride with the Tennessee Stud.
1, 2, 3.
This is David Summers saying so long from the Great Smoky Mountains.